Gunnar had not eaten in 4 days. The German shepherd pressed himself into the farthest corner of his kennel with his back to the room, as though disappearing from view might protect him from whatever came next. He had stopped watching the door the previous morning. The handlers said that was worse. Soren Wilder arrived at Bridger Valley Animal Rescue on a Thursday in late November, when Bozeman was doing what Bozeman does in November, burying the valley under a cold gray sky and making every drive feel like something you had to earn. He was 52 years old, broad through the chest, with short silver hair and the kind of posture that never fully relaxed, even in a parking lot. 14 years in the Navy, 8 of them as a SEAL, had left him with good instincts and a poor relationship with stillness. Since Karen died 18 months ago, stillness was all he had. He kept both hands on the wheel after he parked, the engine ticking as it cooled. The plan was simple. He was going to adopt a small dog, something low maintenance, something that needed food and a yard and not much else. Karen had wanted a dog for years, and he had always had a reason to wait. Deployments, then the long years of being half present, even when he was home, then her diagnosis, then everything that followed the diagnosis. He owed her a dog. It was the specific, manageable form his grief had taken. He had already paid a deposit on a beagle mix named Pepper, 8 months old, recently vaccinated. He had a bed in the truck, a bowl, a leash, a bag of kibble. He had decided. Inside, the shelter smelled of bleach and wet fur, and the kind of industrial coffee that exists only in places where people work too hard for too little. Soren signed the remaining paperwork, and was shaking the hand of the front desk volunteer when a woman stepped out from a side hallway and asked if she could borrow him for a moment. Marcy Duval was 60 years old, stout and unhurried, with dark brown skin, close-cut silver hair, and the composed expression of someone who had seen enough of the world not to be rattled by much of it. She had run Bridger Valley for 19 years. She was careful with people the same way she was careful with animals. She didn't crowd them, didn't rush them, and she never told a comfortable lie when a harder truth might actually help. "Pepper's ready," Marcy said. "He'll be waiting for you in about 15 minutes, but I'm hoping you'll give me a few minutes first." She glanced toward the hallway she had come from. "There's another dog I'd like you to see." Soren studied her face. "I came for Pepper." "I know you did. This will only take a few minutes." Something in the way she said it made him follow her. The hallway past the adoption rooms was cooler than the lobby and quieter. Marcy stopped beside a narrow window set into the wall and waited for Soren to look through it. The kennel was sparse, a mat on the floor, a water bowl untouched near the back wall, and a German shepherd, large, black and tan, ribs visible beneath a coat that had gone flat from stress, sitting with his spine curved and his head down, facing the concrete rather than the door. "His name is Gunnar," Marcy said. "He's 4 years old. He was brought in 8 days ago." Soren looked at the dog for a long moment without speaking. The coloring was different from Ranger's, but the shape wasn't. The broad skull, the long back, the way the dog's weight shifted faintly whenever a sound moved through the hallway. "What happened to him?" Soren said. It wasn't quite a question. "His owner passed away at home, alone. A neighbor noticed the mail piling up. When deputies entered, they found Gunnar on the floor beside his owner's armchair. He had been there for 3 days." Soren was quiet. "He wouldn't let anyone near the man," Marcy continued. "He didn't bite. He stood between the deputies and the chair and growled when they reached forward. They had to call animal control. They brought him here on a blanket." "He was guarding him," Soren said. "Or waiting for him to wake up." "I'm not sure those are different things, with a dog like that." Soren looked through the glass. Gunnar had not moved. His breathing was shallow, his ears pressed so flat against his skull they had nearly vanished. He looked like an animal that had learned not to take up too much space. "He's listed as potentially aggressive in the intake report," Marcy said. "Because of the incident with the deputies, the board is recommending transfer to a rehabilitation facility next week. I've been pushing back, but I need something to show them." Soren turned from the window. "I came for Pepper." "I know. I'm not equipped for a dog with behavioral issues. I live alone. I don't have the setup. I'm not asking you to adopt him." Marcy's voice stayed even. I'm asking if you'd go in and try to get him to drink something. He refused water this morning. You don't have to stay more than 5 minutes. He almost said no again. He had a system for the word no. He deployed it cleanly, without apology. But Marcy was already unlocking the kennel door, and Gunner's left ear had rotated slightly toward the sound of Soren's voice, and that single small movement was enough to make him pause. He went in alone. The room smelled of stress and concrete and something older underneath, the particular sadness of an animal that has stopped expecting comfort. Soren moved slowly, angling his body sideways so Gunner wouldn't read him as a threat. He set a shallow bowl of water several feet from the dog, then backed up and sat against the opposite wall, with his legs stretched out and his gaze dropped to the floor. He started talking. Not to Gunner exactly, just out loud. He described the drive over, the frost on the highway bridges, the coffee he'd bought at the gas station that tasted like it had been brewed before the millennium. He talked about the way the Bridger Range looked from the south side of town when the clouds sat low. Like something from a painting that wasn't trying too hard. He didn't turn around when he heard the soft drag of paws on concrete. He didn't turn around when he heard the water. 3 small laps, barely enough to matter physiologically. But Gunner had chosen to move. No hand had forced him. No leash had pulled him forward. He had crossed the room on his own terms. Soren stared at the floor and did not make it into anything. When he walked back into the hallway, Marcy looked at his face and didn't say anything about the red rim at the edges of his eyes. 48 hours, Soren said. I'll take him for 48 hours. After that, whatever you need to do with him, that's your call. Marcy nodded. That's enough. The paperwork took 20 minutes. Soren called about Pepper. The front desk passed his deposit along to the next family on the list, a young couple who had visited twice and left crying both times because they were second. He stood in the lobby and felt the particular ache of giving up something he had built a plan around, and beneath it, unexpectedly, a loosening, as though the plan had been the thing holding his chest tight all morning. Gunner sat motionless in the transport crate for the entire 40-minute drive home. He made no sound. Soren checked the rearview mirror every few miles. The dog's amber eyes were fixed on the crate door, tracking the only exit the same way Soren had learned to track every exit in every room since coming back from his last deployment. Bad habit, Soren said, to no one in particular. His house was a single-story cedar place on 2 acres at the base of the foothills, bought for privacy and the view of the mountains and the absence of neighbors near enough to ask questions. Karen had called it too quiet. She had also called it beautiful. She had spent 8 years making it feel like a home, and in the 18 months since she died, Soren had been spending most of his energy simply keeping it from feeling like something else. He set the crate just inside the front door and opened it. Gunner didn't move. He stared at the opening, then at the unfamiliar hallway, then back at the opening, as if calculating whether freedom might be another kind of trap. Soren sat down on the floor 10 feet away, back partly turned, and let the cold air drift in from the open front door. Nearly an hour passed before Gunner crossed the threshold. He came low and slow, his nails barely audible on the hardwood, and he didn't go to the bed Soren had set up near the wood stove. Instead, he circled the living room along the walls and positioned himself directly across from the front entrance, sitting upright, spine straight, eyes fixed on the door. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. When Soren finally went upstairs near midnight, he lay on his back in the dark and listened through the floorboards. He heard nothing. He imagined Gunner sitting exactly as he had left him, upright, watching the door, waiting for a man who would not be coming back through it. Soren knew what that felt like. He was back downstairs before 4 in the morning. A small lamp beside the couch threw amber light across the room. Gunner hadn't moved from his post. His head had drooped with exhaustion, but every time his eyes began to close, he forced them open again and fixed his gaze on the entrance. Soren lowered himself to the floor and sat with his back against the couch, facing the door beside him. "No one's coming for us tonight," he said quietly. "Might as well let it go." Gunner's ears moved. They sat like that for a long time, 2 creatures keeping watch over a house full of ordinary silence. Somewhere around 5 in the morning, Gunner's front legs slid forward. He lowered his chest to the floor. His head stayed up for another few minutes. Then it dropped to his paws, and his eyes closed, and they stayed closed. He slept for 90 minutes. Soren didn't move until he woke. The second day passed in small adjustments. Gunner ate half a cup of food while Soren was in the other room. He drank from the water bowl twice without being prompted. He no longer flattened against the wall when Soren entered the room. Though he tracked every movement with the focused attention of an animal, still deciding whether proximity was safe. Soren moved carefully. He'd spent enough time reading situations that could turn wrong to know that the worst thing you could do with a frightened creature, dog or otherwise, was push the pace. He worked at the kitchen table. He split firewood in the early afternoon. He didn't speak much, but when he did, he kept his voice at the same low register he had used in tight spaces with his team, the tone that communicated, "I know where we are, and I am not afraid." The storm came around 9 o'clock. It announced itself the way mountain storms do, a shift in pressure, then wind, then the creak of the pines along the north side of the property taking on weight. Soren was reading near the wood stove when a gust hit the side of the house hard enough to shake the windows. The power went. The lamp blinked out. The refrigerator stopped humming. Darkness came in all at once. In the kitchen, something slid off the counter. A glass, probably. It hit the tile and shattered. The sound was small. It was also the exact pitch and weight of a piece of equipment striking stone in a dry riverbed in a country Soren had spent years trying not to think about. He stopped breathing. The room dissolved. What replaced it was older. Dust in the air instead of darkness, radio static, the particular silence that comes in the 3 seconds before a blast, when the world seems to know what is about to happen and holds itself very still. Ranger had been out ahead, moving low and fast through the smoke the way he always moved, with the focused certainty of an animal that trusted his handler completely. Soren had called him back. He remembered the command, remembered the exact sound of his own voice saying it. Ranger had turned. His ears came up, and then the second charge detonated, and the smoke turned white, and Soren spent the next 4 minutes on his knees, with his hands pressed against a dog who was trying to stay with him and couldn't. He didn't remember kneeling on his own kitchen floor. He became aware of it gradually. The hardwood beneath him, the cold air from the kitchen doorway, his own breathing which had gone ragged and too fast. He pressed one hand to the floor and tried to slow down. It didn't work the way it was supposed to. Then he felt it. A weight, light, tentative, placed with extreme care against his knee. Gunner had crossed the room. Soren didn't know how long it had taken him. The dog was still trembling. He could feel it. The fine vibration running through Gunner's jaw and neck and shoulders, the shaking of an animal deep inside its own fear. But he had come anyway. He had left the wall and crossed the dark room and lowered his head until it rested against the leg of the man kneeling on the floor. Beneath Soren's hand, which had found the side of Gunner's neck without him deciding to put it there, the dog's heartbeat ran fast and terrified. Gunner flinched at the touch. He didn't retreat. "You were scared," Soren said. His voice came out broken. "You were scared and you came over here anyway." Gunner breathed against his palm. Soren stayed on the floor for a long time, the shaking in his shoulders eased by degrees. Gunner's trembling eased too, though more slowly, with the careful timing of a body that had learned fear in a way that didn't leave quickly. Neither of them moved toward the other. They simply remained where they were, the distance between them, exactly the width of what both of them had needed, to survive something they hadn't asked for. The power came back near midnight. Soren swept up the broken glass in the quiet way you move when something is sleeping nearby that you don't want to wake. Gunner slept on the hardwood 6 feet from the couch, his body angled for the first time, away from the front door. In the morning, Marcy called with information found through a county contact. Gunner's previous owner had been Harold Webb, 68 years old, retired Army combat medic. 2 tours. A man who had lived alone since his wife Louise passed away 9 years prior, and who had become, by all accounts, increasingly invisible in his own neighborhood. A polite wave when you saw him, shorter conversations each year, and then mostly just the sight of him walking with the dog at dawn and at dusk, which was how his neighbors knew he was still all right. His son found the registration, Marcy said. Kevin Webb, he lives in Missoula. He wants to talk if you're willing. The call happened that afternoon. Kevin Webb was 43, with his father's economy of words and a grief he was still learning the shape of. He explained that Harold had not been a difficult man. He had been a thorough one, his tools organized, his yard maintained, his routines unchanged year to year. After Louise died, Gunnar had become the architecture of Harold's days. The reason to wake up, the reason the kitchen light came on before sunrise. He talked to him the way he used to talk to his squad, Kevin said. Short sentences, hand signals when he didn't feel like talking out loud. He told me once that Gunnar was the only one who never needed him to explain himself. Soren was quiet for a moment. Under the table, Gunnar had settled near his boots. Sometime in the past hour, without announcement, he had moved from his post by the wall to within 3 feet of where Soren sat. He doesn't understand why your father isn't coming back, Soren said. No. Kevin's voice thinned. He just knows that every door he's walked through since then has taken him further from where he needs to be. After the call, Soren sat for a long time looking at the shelf across the room. One of the few photos he had kept out after Karen died. The two of them on a trail in Glacier. Her laughing at something out of frame, him looking at her instead of the camera. Karen had kept a photo of Ranger on that same shelf beside it. A photo Soren had put away the month he got home. He wasn't sure exactly when it had come back out. Sometime in the past year. Sometime when he wasn't paying attention. That evening, Gunnar stole half a sandwich off the table while Soren's back was turned. He ate it with the conviction of a dog who had made his decision and wasn't going to be talked out of it, then backed up 3 feet and sat very still, waiting for the consequences. Soren stared at the empty plate. You refused food for 4 days, he said, and your first real meal is turkey on rye. He didn't manage to stay irritated. The laugh that came out of him was short and rough and not entirely comfortable. The kind that happens when the body remembers something before the mind gives it permission. Gunnar's tail moved once against the floor, a single, careful thump. Then he went still again, watching, as if uncertain whether one was too many. It wasn't too many. That night Soren called Marcy and told her the 48 hours were up. She waited. I need more time, he said. She didn't make him explain it. The months that followed were not a transformation so much as an accumulation. Some weeks the progress was obvious. Gunnar learning to tolerate the sound of metal clinking without flinching, sleeping through a truck backfiring on the road, coming to find Soren in the workshop rather than waiting for him to return. Other weeks things receded. A slammed door at the hardware store on a Saturday. A particular quality of afternoon light that seemed to return both of them to somewhere else. Those days they spent close to home, moving slowly, neither pushing the other to be further along than they were. Soren started going to Bridger Valley twice a week. At first he repaired things. A broken latch on the isolation ward, a gap in the perimeter fence along the east side. Marcy put him near the kennels eventually, the way she put all the useful ones near things that needed patience rather than speed. He sat outside crates. He didn't make promises, he stayed. A retired Marine named Walter found his way there through a support group Soren mentioned in passing at the VA. Walter had lost his brother the year before and had stopped cooking for himself, which is the kind of thing that happens quietly and then suddenly all at once. He started fostering a 3-legged lab mix that liked to lean against people when they sat down. A hospice nurse named Simone volunteered on weekends. She had spent 20 years sitting beside people at the end of their lives, and knew more than most about what it meant to be present without requiring anything in return. She took in a fearful shepherd mix that slept under her bed for 3 weeks, and eventually moved to the foot of it. Marcy put steady ground on the intake form in pencil one afternoon, and the name stayed. On a morning the following spring, Soren stood in the front yard with the Bridgers bright and clear above the valley. The last of the snowpack gone from everything below the tree line. Gunnar moved through the grass ahead of him, nose down, investigating a patch of clover with the seriousness of a dog who believed clover deserved that kind of attention. A metal hoe clipped the stone path near the fence. A sharp, ringing sound. Gunner's head came up. One paw lifted. He looked at Soren. Then he lowered his head and went back to the clover. Not because the sound hadn't mattered. It had, but fear, Soren had come to understand, did not always have to decide what came next. You could hear it and feel it, and then keep walking anyway. This was something he and Gunner had worked out together, slowly, without naming it, the same way they had worked out most things between them. Inside the house, on the shelf in the living room, Karen laughed at something out of frame, and Soren looked at her instead of the camera. And Ranger stood beside him in the photo Karen had kept there all along. Not as a memorial and not as a wound, but as evidence. Proof that love could exist completely and be lost completely, and still leave something behind that was not only absence. On the coffee table, Gunner's collar waited in the late morning light. Plain black nylon, simple buckle, chosen because it made no noise and required nothing dramatic. Soren picked it up and went to the door. "Come on," he said. Gunner came. Outside, the valley was wide and still, and smelled of pine sap and thawing earth. And the two of them walked out into it together, not because the hard part was finished, but because the hard part was something they had both decided, without ceremony, to carry forward instead of put down. Some griefs do not end, they just find the right company.